where today we examine a shocking case of betrayal, power, and tragedy. A sheriff's affair with a teenager leads to pregnancy. Sheriff Talon was a well-known figure in Monroe, Louisiana. At 46 years old, he had been serving in law enforcement for over 2 decades. People in Monroe looked up to him for his strong leadership and charming personality. However, behind the badge, Talon had a darker side. He was carrying on a secret affair with 18-year-old Natasha, a local waitress at the Waffle House, for several months. While publicly, Talon presented himself as a devoted husband to his wife of 21 years, Teresa. The reality was far more complicated. Teresa, a respected schoolteacher, had long suspected her husband's infidelity, though she maintained a calm and collected exterior. The whispers of Talon's behavior had been eating away at her for years. She had chosen to stay in the marriage for the sake of their children and to keep up appearances in their tight-knit community. Talon's controlling and sometimes abusive nature put a strain on their relationship, leaving Teresa feeling trapped and resentful. Natasha, on the other hand, washy and vulnerable. She was easily manipulated by Talon, who promised her financial stability and a better life. She had recently graduated from high school and was dreaming of going to college. But those dreams faded as her relationship with Talon deepened. Though she tried to stay hopeful, she grew more anxious over time, especially as she felt Talon pulling her further away from her friends and family. When Natasha found out she was pregnant, everything changed. The young waitress felt trapped in a situation she had no control over. Talon was furious when she broke the news, and he quickly became cold and distant. Though he had charmed her early on, Talon had no interest in fathering another child, especially one that could threaten his reputation. This love triangle created a storm of emotions for everyone involved. Natasha was scared and unsure of what her future would look like with a baby on the way, while Talon felt the weight of his actions and the potential public fallout for Teresa. The affair and the pregnancy was a devastating blow she had spent years enduring. Talon's controlling ways, but the thought of her husband fathering a child with a woman nearly the same age as their son Smith was too much to bear in the days leading up to his death. Talon's once powerful persona started to crack. The pressure of the situation was becoming too much, and everyone in this twisted love triangle could feel that something had to give. On the morning of June 28, 2009, Sheriff Talon was found dead in his own home. It was around 8:30 a.m. when his longtime neighbor Matthew noticed something was wrong. Matthew, a retired postal worker, had gone outside to fetch his morning paper when he saw that Talon's front door was slightly ajar. Matthew knew this was unusual, since Talon was always particular about security. Given his position as sheriff, concerned Matthew decided to check on his neighbor. When Matthew stepped inside, he immediately noticed signs of a struggle. The living room was in disarray, with cushions thrown around and a broken basin on the floor. His heart raced as he made his way to the master bedroom, calling out Talon's name. But there was no response. When he reached the doorway, he froze. Talon's lifeless body was sprawled on the bedroom floor, lying in a pool of blood. He had been shot multiple times and blood spatter covered the walls. The grisly scene was unlike anything Matthew had ever seen. Shaking with fear, Matthew quickly backed out of the house and called 11. "There's been a murder," he told the dispatcher, his voice barely steady. Within minutes, emergency responders were on their way. When the police arrived, they found Matthew outside, pale and visibly shaken. He explained what he had seen, and officers quickly entered the home. They later described the crime scene as chaotic and violent. It was clear there had been a confrontation. Talon had been shot in both the head and chest, as well as in the genital area, and there were signs that the attack had been sudden. His service revolver, which was used in the murder, lay on the floor. Near his body, the house had other evidence of the struggle: overturned furniture and shattered glass. But nothing had been stolen, leading investigators to believe this was a personal attack rather than a random robbery. Detective Tillman immediately called for a full forensics team, and the investigation into the murder of Sheriff Gunn was officially underway. The small town of Monroe was about to learn that their beloved sheriff had been hiding far more than they ever imagined. The police arrived at New Gaines house within minutes of Matthew Jenkins' 911 call on June 27, 2002, in Detective Maria Tillman, a 15-year veteran of the Monroe Police Department, led the investigation, known for her non-nonsense approach. Tillman immediately began assessing the chaotic crime scene. The house was in disarray with furniture overturned, glass shattered, and a pool of blood surrounding Talon's body in the master bedroom. Talon had been shot 3 times, once in the head, once in the chest, and once in the genital area. The shots to the head and chest were consistent with a calculated murder, but the wound to the genitals stood out. Detective Tillman and her team theorized that the shooter had aimed at this area deliberately, perhaps as a sign of anger or revenge, suggesting a deeply personal motive. It wasn't just about killing him. Tillman would later say this was about sending a message. The fact that his service revolver had been used in the attack pointed to someone familiar. With Talon's life and ruse for NT, teams were called in to calm the scene for him. More clues they carefully photographed, the blood spatter across the bedroom room walls, and gathered evidence from the shattered vase and overturned fern. There were no signs of forced entry, leading investigators to believe Talon had known his attacker and likely let them into the house. Lovingly, this detail, combined with the gunshot wound to his genital, suggested the crime had been driven by emotions, perhaps rage, jealousy, or betrayal. By late afternoon, the police had pieced together a rough timeline of events. Talon had likely been attacked late the night before, or in the early hours of the morning. His wounds, the lack of stolen items, and the overall condition of the house confirmed that this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was a targeted killing. And the message sent by the Jiffle wound hinted at personal or sexual motives. Detective Tillman and her team were now focused on uncovering who had reason to want Talon dead. As they gathered evidence, they prepared to question those closest to him, knowing that in a town as small as Monroe, dark secrets wouldn't stay hidden for long. Teresa, Talon's wife of 21 years, was one of the first people the police questioned in their investigation. When she sat down with Detective Mara Tillman on the evening of June 27, 2008, Teresa's demeanor was composed, but her words told the story of years of unhappiness and betrayal. Teresa admitted that her marriage to Talon had been in trouble. For a long time, she explained that she had suspected for years that Talon was unfaithful. "I just knew," she told the detective. "There were too many signs." She detailed how she had frequently found evidence of Talon's infidelity in their shared SUV. It started with little things, stray hair clips or unfamiliar perfumes. Then Teresa found the thong under the passenger seat, followed by used condoms tucked away in the glove compartment. Each discovery confirmed what she had feared. Talon was cheating on her. Suspicions were finally confirmed in the most shocking way possible. About 5 months before Talon's murder, Teresa came home early from her job as a school teacher and caught him in the ACT. She opened the door to the living room and found Talon and Natasha, the 18-year-old waitress from Waffle House, having sex on her couch. "I couldn't believe it," she recalled to the police. "I just stood there, frozen. My husband leaping a girl young enough to be his daughter." The betrayal was too much for Teresa to bear. She confronted Talon immediately, but he was dismissive, telling her that what she saw wasn't a big deal. He said it was just STX, and that didn't mean anything. Teresa recounted, her voice trembling, "But it meant everything to me," as if the affair wasn't enough. Teresa soon found out that Natasha was pregnant with Talon's child. Teresa overheard Talon on the phone with Natasha discussing the pregnancy late one night. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her husband not only having an affair, but about to have a child with someone else. Teresa had put up with so much for so long, but this for her was just too much. The revelation of the affair, followed by the news of Natasha's pregnancy, had pushed Teresa to her emotional breakpoint. She felt humiliated, angry, and utterly betrayed by the man she had once loved. She told police she just wanted it to be over, her marriage and her life. Despite her painful admission, Teresa remained calm. During the interrogation, she denied any involvement in Talon's murder, insisting that although she hated what he had done, she hadn't killed him. The police, however, saw her as a key suspect, and her motive, years of betrayal and danger, was clear. Natasha, the pregnancy 18-year-old waitress from the local Waffle House, had been swept into a complicated and manipulative relationship with Sheriff Talon. When police questioned Natasha, she described how Talon had promised her a future far beyond the like she was living. Growing up in a small town, the daughter of a felon, Natasha had big dreams, but few means to achieve them. She had dropped out of school and was stuck working late shifts at the Waffle House, living paycheck to paycheck. When Talon entered her life, things changed. Natasha told the police he promised her the world, and that he could take care of her and give her everything. She wanted Talon, who was nearly 30 years her senior, convinced Natasha that he would buy her a house, support her financially, and even take her on vacations. He once told her he was planning a trip for them to Dollywood and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, a dream vacation for Natasha, who had never left Louisiana before these promises made. Natasha felt like she had a future. She could look forward to Talon's power, and charisma made it hard for her to see the darker side of their relationship. However, things took a turn when Natasha discovered she was pregnant in late April 2009. After weeks of feeling nauseous and fatigue, she took a pregnancy test. The result was positive. Natasha was stunned. She had never planned to get pregnant, especially not with Talon's child. "I didn't know what the bleep to do," she told the police. "I felt trapped." The pregnancy made Natasha feel conflicted. On one hand, she thought Talon would keep his promise of financial security and provide for both her and the baby. On the other hand, she knew deep down that Malal had been lying to her. His promises of a life together felt hollow, and she feared he would abandon her now that she was pregnant. The pressure mounted, and Natasha began feeling isolated, not knowing who to turn to. Her situation became even more complicated when Teresa, Talon's wife, confronted her. Natasha described the terrifying moment when Teresa showed up at her apartment one afternoon holding a steak knife shortly after learning about the pregnancy. She knew everything and said she was going to roast my baby on an open fire, Natasha recalled. Teresa accused Natasha of ruining her marriage and demanded to know if the pregnancy was real. Natasha admitted it, trembling. "With fear, I was scared," Natasha told investigators. Teresa was furious, "And I didn't know what the bleat she was going to do." Natasha felt overwhelmed by guilt and shame, caught in a love triangle that was spiraling out of control. She told police that while she wanted to escape the situation, she never intended for things to get violent. Her vulnerability and fear made her a suspect, but she insisted she didn't have the strength or anger to murder Talon still. Her pregnancy and affair made her deeply involved in the case, and police saw her as a key figure in unraveling the truth. The twist in the investigation came when police dug deeper into Talon Gaines' affair with Natasha. During another intense interrogation, Natasha broke down and revealed the disturbing details of how Talon had been manipulating her for months. The officers were shocked as she described the emotional stranglehold Talon had on her life. It wasn't just the promise of a house or a trip to Dollywood that kept her in his grasp. Talon had gone much further. Natasha explained that her mother, felon with a history of drug offenses, was currently serving time in prison. Talon, using his power as sheriff, had threatened that if Natasha ever left him or revealed the pregnancy, he would use his influence to have guards torture her mother. Behind bars, the fear and pressure this created made Natasha feel completely trapped. As the police listened, the gravity of Talon's manipulation became clear. This wasn't just an affair that had spiraled out of control. It was an abuse of power that left Natasha feeling terrified, and cornered detectives felt anger and disgust at Talon's exploitation. One officer later described Talon's actions as a shocking abuse of trust and authority by a vile slug, but there was more to the story. Natasha also revealed that she had dated Talonson Smith before becoming involved with the sheriff. Smith and Natasha had ended their relationship just months before she and Talon started their affair, though Smith had no idea that his father had stepped in as her new lover. The discovery of this prior relationship added another layer of complexity to the case. Smith, who had been estranged from his father for years, had already confronted Talon after finding out about the affair, though he was unaware of the pregnancy of the time. This twist in the investigation opened up new motives and dynamics between the key players. Detectives began to wonder if Smith had a role in the murder, or if Natasha's actions were driven by fear of Talon's threats. The manipulation Talon exerted over Natasha and the tangled relationships within the Gaines family left investigators piecing together a puzzle that had become much darker than they originally expected. Mitt, 21, was no stranger to trouble described by locals as a wild card. Smith had a reputation for being promiscuous and quick-tempered. His relationship with Natasha had been turbulent from the start. Natasha eventually broke up with Smith due to his unfaithfulness. He was known to cheat on her with several women, and even a couple of men. Friends of Natasha reported that she had been deeply hurt by Smith's behavior. And the final straw came when she discovered that Smith had been seeing other women behind her back. What made the situation even more alarming was Smith's violent reputation. Despite his quiet demeanor around strangers, Smith had a dark side that surfaced. In his relationships during police interrogation, Natasha revealed a shocking detail. Smith had physically abused her on multiple occasions. In a tearful confession, she admitted that she'd been pregnant with Smith's child before their breakup. But Smith had beaten her into miscarrying several times. They were stunned by these revelations, adding another layer of tragedy to Natasha's story. When Smith learned that Natasha was now pregnant with his father's child, his rage only grew. According to those close to him, Smith felt humiliated and betrayed, not just by Natasha but by his own father, discovering that his father Talon had not only stolen his girlfriend, but also gotten her pregnant was too much for him to handle. Friends described Smith as feeling completely shattered and out of control after the news broke. One friend recalled Smith storming out of a local bar after hearing a rumor about Natasha's pregnancy, visibly upset and muttering about taking care of it during his interrogation. Smith's anger and frustration were palpable. Police described his demeanor as volatile, noting that Smith struggled to contain his emotions throughout the questioning. When confronted with the accusations, Smith denied any involvement in his father's murder, but his hostility toward both Malal and Natasha was clear. Police later stated that Smith's rage was hard to ignore. Though there was no concrete evidence linking him directly to the crime, Smith's motive for murder was certainly strong. His father had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and Natasha's pregnancy was a constant reminder of the pain he had suffered. But despite his violent reputation and past abuse of Natasha, Smith maintained that he had nothing to do with the crime. On the night of June 23, 2009, Teresa finally snapped. After years of suspicion, betrayal, and humiliation, she could no longer tolerate the lies and manipulation from her husband Talon. The discovery of his affair with Natasha and the fact that Natasha was pregnant with this child was the breaking point. For months, Teresa had been quietly seething, her anger building to a boiling point. She felt trapped in her marriage, disgusted by the man she once loved, and consumed by the weight of her husband's infidelity. That night, Teresa confronted Malal in their living room. The argument started like so many others, but this time Teresa had a plan as Talon tried to brush her off, dismissing her concerns. His paranoia as she grabbed the gun that Talon kept hidden in the closet with trembling hands. In her heart, seeing she pointed the weapon at her husband. In a cold, quiet rage, she fired a single shot, hitting Malal in the groin. The police later theorized that the location of the wound was not a coincidence. It symbolized Talon's betrayal of their marriage. Talon fell to the ground, bleeding profusely, and Teresa watched as the man she had spent years with lay dying at her feet. In that moment, a flood of emotions washed over her: relief, guilt, anger, and fear. She felt justified in interactions, believing Talon had deserved it for everything he had put her through, but at the same time a deep sense of dread crept in. What had she done? Teresa attempted to stage the scene, dragging Talon's body toward the garage in a desperate effort to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. But it didn't take long for the police to see through the rest. When detectives arrived, they quickly noticed inconsistencies in Teresa's story, and forensic evidence pointed to her as the primary suspect. The gun used in the murder was registered to Talon, and there were no signs of forced entry. Under interrogation, Teresa broke down. Confessing to the crime, the weight of what she had done finally hit her. ACE officers placed her in handcuffs. Teresa felt a strange mixture of resignation and regret. She had hoped that ending Talon's life would bring her peace, but instead it brought her nothing but sorrow and the cold reality of a life behind bars. In January 2011, Teresa faced trial for the murder of her husband, Sheriff Talon. The courtroom was filled with family, friends, and curious members of the Monroe, Louisiana community. Teresa's defense attorney, Lisa Carlo Beans, argued that Teresa had been driven to kill Talon due to years of emotional abuse and betrayal. They employed the cheated on-wife defense, claiming that Teresa was a victim of her husband's infidelity, which ultimately led to a breaking point. Carlo Beans presented evidence of Talon's long affair, with 19-year-old testimonies highlighted how Teresa had found disturbing evidence of Talon's cheating, such as condoms in women's Underwear in their family SUV car of beans painted a vivid picture of Teresa as a woman who had been pushed to her limits, and that Talon's catless behavior was the catalyst for the tragic confrontation that led to his death. Prosecutor Richard Dugey McDougall countered with a different narrative here that Teresa acted with premeditation. Having confronted Mallow multiple times about his infidelities, the prosecution aimed to show that she was fully aware of her actions when she's shy, they described the crime scene, emphasizing the brutality of the murderer and the emotional toll it had taken on the community. As the trial progressed, Teresa's family attended every session, hoping for a positive outcome. Teresa appeared calm, but inside, she felt a whirlwind of emotions. She was anxious about the possibility of spending years in prison. The community's reaction to her case was mixed. Some sympathized with her plight, while others saw her as a martyr after days. Off testimony, the jury deliberated on January 21, 2012. They returned with a verdict. Teresa was found guilty of second-degree murder. The news hit her like a punch to the gut. The emotional toll of the trial and the verdict weighed heavily on her. Teresa had hoped for a lighter sentence, believing that her difficult circumstances would be considered instead. She faced a lengthy prison term. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison, which left Teresa feeling devastated. Tears streamed down her face as she realized she would be separated from her children. 4 years. Thanks for watching True Crime Cases.